For those of you that I don't know, my name is Jill Ferris. I'm the Vice President of Education and Interpretation here at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, and I'm excited for something a little different. Winter is normally our speaker series time of year when we're bringing in guests to talk and help get us through the long, cold days. But I'm excited to be with you, not in the dark of a Thursday evening, but on this surprisingly beautiful and sunny Saturday afternoon. So thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are relatively new to our series, we do offer a whole slate of programs and we'll continue. Really, I have programming coming through May. But to give you a teaser of some of the speakers who are upcoming, this coming Thursday on January 30th, local historian Eric Cheesem will be here to dive into a topic that I'm just fascinated by, the cultural history of Chessie the sea monster. He spoke at Oyster Fest. If you didn't have a chance to come, then please come back. He looks not just at Chessie, true or false, but really the circumstances that led to this concept of cryptozoology and how we've taken in the concept here in the Chesapeake. We'll be continuing into February and March with talks including Beyond 2025, What is Next for the Chesapeake Bay Watershed, which is on Thursday, February 6th, and Unpacking History, Black Packing House Workers and Owners in the Chesapeake on Thursday, February 20th. And last but not least, on March 27th, we will be back with a fan favorite. Our Waterman Story Swap will be back. Last year, I had a full house here, and I think I had another 30 or 40 people who are online. All of our programs are offered hybrid, so you're welcome to join us in person. You're welcome to participate on Zoom, or we have also been uploading the recordings to YouTube, so you can join us after the fact as well. Feel free to sign up or register. We're happy to have you for all of our talks. But this afternoon, we're taking a dive into maritime history, exploring the Chesapeake connections and the story of the iconic schooner America. Shortly after its launch in New York in 1851, the vessel crossed the Atlantic and sailed to an upset victory against a fleet of champions. The silver cup that America won that day is still coveted by sportsmen. This afternoon, David Gendell will trace the history of the famous vessel, including the never-before-told story of its final days at the Annapolis Yacht Yard, combining archival sources and oral histories to shape the story. David is an Annapolis native with an extensive sailboat racing background. The oldest of three boys, he grew up as a river rat, swimming, sailing, crabbing, and cruising with his family in and on the Chesapeake Bay. He first owned his Coast Guard captain's license at age 19. He first raced from Newport to Bermuda at 22, 1 week after graduating from college. In 1995, he co-founded Spin Sheet, a Chesapeake Bay sailing magazine, and served as editor for 12 years. In 2004, he co-founded Prop Talk, a Chesapeake Bay powerboating magazine. Both magazines still remain in production, and I'm sure you have seen copies. David is the author of Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse, a Chesapeake Bay icon, which was published by History Press in 2020, the first and only book devoted to the 1875 lighthouse. His latest book is The Last Days of the Schooner America, a lost icon at the Annapolis Warship Factory, which was published by Lions Press in 2024. He does have the book here today, so if you haven't seen it, you are welcome to purchase your copy from David after our talk. And without further ado, I'm pleased to turn the microphone over.
Thank you for that great introduction. It's a pleasure to be here on a Saturday and see so many friendly faces. This museum and St. Michael's are an important part of my own story. We used to cruise here as a family in the late 70s and early 80s. And then in the late 80s, I was working as a captain for the Annapolis Sailing School. And some of you may remember we came in every Wednesday here on our Learn to Live Aboard cruise and spent the night every Wednesday night here. So raced on Wednesday night races here, brought my kids here when they were growing up. I maintain a membership here. So it's a real honor to be speaking here this afternoon on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is the schooner yacht America, which is arguably the most famous yacht ever built. Here she is in a modern painting done by Russ Kramer out of Mystic, Connecticut. And Russ was kind enough to allow use of a section of this image for the cover of the book that I wrote that came out in August. And as Jill mentioned, we have copies of it here. It's also available online. But looking at this picture, what we see here is a 110-foot schooner built specifically as a racing yacht. So this is not a vessel that was built for any purpose other than winning sailboat races. Very unique concept in 1851. We'll talk about that in a moment. But here she is seen in the famous race in August of 1851. Just a couple things that I'll point out. First of all, off her bow are the Needles. Those of you that have sailed on the southern coast of England, and the Solent off the Isle of Wight, that's a very recognizable landmark, establishing her in that August 1851 race. We see she sailed with a tiller, which is fascinating for a 110-foot vessel. We'll talk about that in a moment. And we see a big gold-painted eagle spanning her transom, a real statement. She's painted black. She's got kind of a menacing look to her. She's sailed by a crew of mystic men, the finest sailors available at that time. And here she is winning that famous race in 1851. So we'll get to why she was built in that race. But we're also going to talk about, incongruently, it seems, 70-foot-long wooden patrol torpedo boats built for the Allied navies in Annapolis during World War II, powered by 3 Packard engines capable of running 47 knots through the water, and shipped to the Pacific, to the Indian Ocean, and to the Atlantic Ocean for the Royal Navy, for the Soviet Navy, who were our allies at that time during World War II. So how are these two stories connected? How could these two stories, they seem on paper so far apart from each other? And that was a project that I began to dive into probably about 20 years ago when I first heard about it. Around Annapolis, there had always been rumors that there was some connection between the Schooner Yacht America and Annapolis, specifically the Eastport section of Annapolis. And there's lots of bits and pieces of America around, including some in the collection at this museum. And it seems that anybody that's been around boats on the bay, especially in the Annapolis area, can pull out a little hunk and say, this is a turning block off America. This is a piece of America. This is a nail from America, et cetera. So I began to dive into these two, into the America story, and it led me to this PT boat story. So I'm going to run you through America's story, the Annapolis Yacht Yard story during World War II, and take them together. So spoiler alerts right out of the gate here. America does not make it to 2025. She's no longer with us, hence the title of the book. And we win the war, right? We being the Allies win the war, right? So how, again, do these two things come together? I'm going to walk you through that here this afternoon. So as I mentioned, the Schooner Yacht America was built over the winter of 1850 into 1851 in Lower Manhattan. She was built right from the beginning to be a fast racing yacht. Some of New York's leading businessmen, some of New York's wealthiest men put together a syndicate to build this yacht. These were sportsmen. They liked to gamble. Those days, there was no NFL to gamble on. There was no DraftKings. There was no Keno, et cetera. So they gambled on horse racing. They gambled on yacht racing. And one fun way to participate, if you had enough money, was to enter your own yacht into the race and bet on it. So they wanted to build an incredibly fast racing schooner. As she was being built in Lower Manhattan, an invitation came from across the Atlantic. It seems that the leaders of the Royal Yacht Squadron in England had gotten word of this schooner being built in Lower Manhattan and sent an invitation to her owners and said, hey, if you'd like to bring her across the Atlantic to race against us, we'll welcome you. We'd love to have you come. This was a sporting invitation. This was all they needed to hear. We've now been called up to the big leagues. We're going to go and race against the fastest racing yachts on the planet, who are in Cowes on the southern coast of England, on the Isle of Wight. So this schooner had a very unique pedigree right out of the gate. Before she even hit the water, she was newsworthy. Newspapers covered her. Engravers came out and did artwork depicting her building. The word went out that these leading New York sportsmen, Schuyler's, Hamiltons, this type of families were working together to build a schooner to go challenge the British. Very unique design parameters on this. She not only had to be fast to win a closed course race, where you go around specific marks and come back to the finish line. She had to be fast and nimble enough to do that through a broad range of conditions, right? We might be racing just like here in 5 knots of wind. We might be racing in 25 knots of wind. She also had to cross the Atlantic on her own keel. So she had to be stout enough and stiff enough to cross the Atlantic on her own keel. That's an interesting design parameter for around the buoys racer. And finally, these were wealthy gentlemen. As I said, these were descendants of Alexander Hamilton. These were big New York City guys. There was a good chance that the Queen Victoria was going to visit the yacht when she was in England. So she had to be built to a very proper standard. She had to be clean. This could not be a stripped out racer. She had to be proper. So with those 3 design parameters in mind, America is launched in May of 1851. It's down on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I've drawn a square there. The shipyard where she was built is long gone, but it's roughly where, if you take 12th Street across from the West Village and go and hit the East River, that's roughly where America was launched in the spring of 1851. Ooh, that's not a good sign. Okay. We're coming back. So as we come back, I will say, the crossing of the Atlantic was a big deal. This was the first time a yacht had crossed an ocean specifically for the purposes of competition. It had never been done before. The late Melbourne Smith did this depiction of America. This is as close as we can come to her sail plan that summer. You'll see very simple, very clean. Dramatically raked masts. Dramatically raked masts bring the center of effort on the sails down and aft, closer to the rudder, allowing for more sail area and more control. Very cleanly rigged. Does not need to be sailed by a number of people. There are not yards to brace. There are not dozens of sails to deal with. Just a very simple, clean rig. Among the unique innovations that went into America was she was designed to be fitted with a wheel for passage making, sailing in the ocean on deliveries and things, and then she could be swapped out to a tiller. Incredibly clever and unique arrangement. That meant when you were racing and you wanted the control of a tiller, you had that, but when you're in the ocean and you're on long passages, you had a nice wheel. The sails were made out of tightly woven material across the river from New York and New Jersey. Just like a modern racing program, she had race sails and she had delivery sails. So on that crossing over the Atlantic, she kept the race sails tucked away below, out of the sun, out of the weather. And when she got to England, she was able to have the racing sails bent on and go racing. So we have a very technologically advanced vessel. Is that on my end? Okay. We have a very technologically advanced vessel with the latest innovations. Anybody that talks about the modern America's Cup and they think those boats look like they're from outer space, those foiling boats, I can promise you that when America arrived on the scene in 1851, she looked equally as exotic. She looked equally as cutting edge. In fact, when she rolled up to the Royal Yacht Squadron in Cowes, one of the older gentlemen there, who was considered the dean of British yachting, looks at her emerging from the fog and says, if she's right, the rest of us are wrong. That's how radical she was when she went racing. So just very quickly here, is that me or is that you too? Okay. How do I get it to go? There we go. So quickly here, because I know I've got some boat nerds in the audience. The Baltimore Clippers of the 1814s were just one generation ahead of America. And America took a lot of design cues from the Baltimore Clippers. I tried to line them up as closely as possible. This is the first Pride of Baltimore. You can see the dramatically raked masts, the long, low freeboard, long, flat aft sections, et cetera. So a lot of design cues were taken from the Baltimore Clippers for America's initial design. She crosses the Atlantic on her own keel. Peter Boudreau, who was ironically one of the captains of the Pride of Baltimore, lives down the street from me. He did this painting in his retirement of America crossing the Atlantic to go meet the British fleet of cows. And what happened that August day in 1851 is the stuff of legend. So the upstart American vessel sails across the Atlantic and wins a race around the Isle of Wight. Wins so convincingly that as she approaches the finish line, Queen Victoria, who's watching from the royal yacht, says to her signalman, who's in the lead? And the signalman with his telescope comes back and says, the Americans are in first. And she says, well, then who's second? And he famously said, there is no second. That's how far ahead America was. The band plays Yankee Doodle as she crosses the finish line. There are fireworks, and America's owners are presented with a silver trophy. The news is very good on this side of the Atlantic. She's celebrated, she's feted. After the race in cows, the Queen comes and visits. This is a painting that was done in 1902. You know, we know now she was sailed with a tiller in that race, so this has the wheel on here, so you'll have to forgive the artist 120 years ago. But this is the Queen arriving on board the yacht. You know, legend has that she ran a gloved finger along a shelf and it came up spotless. This is one of the owners reporting this. Also that she commented on the unique way the ballast was stored. So the lead was molded to the shape of the hull to get it low and to get it as much in there as possible. She commented on that. So she was either pretty good at yachts or she was well coached. But either way, we know she visited the yacht. We know that she was engaged. So they win the trophy, which today is called America's Cup, named for the yacht, not for the country, right? So America's Cup. The owners take the cup back to the United States on a steamship and begin hosting a round of celebratory dinners in Manhattan. They're heroes. The vessel stays behind in England. They're done. This was very transactional. This is not like a log canoe that you all might race here in St. Michael's, and the canoe is very carefully passed down from generation to generation. This was a very transactional vessel. The syndicate of New York owners were ready to move on to the next. They had proven it, and they were ready to move on to the next. Take what they had learned. So America was sold to a local in England, and she stayed there. But the cup is still raced for. So this is a famous picture from 1987. Dennis Conner won the cup in Australia and brought it back to the United States. Here he is meeting with President Reagan. That is the same cup that's raced for today. And in fact, just a few months ago, Team New Zealand defended the cup in Barcelona, Spain. And Team New Zealand currently hold the America's Cup. So America, the vessel, just a few months old, literally 4 months old, is in England now under new owners. She was very racy and she was a lot to handle. So the new owners cut down the spars. They add ballast. England enters the Crimean War and the yachting scene freezes up. And there's no yachting while there's a war on. America changes hands. She changes hands again. And just 8 years after that famous victory, she's abandoned on a mudflat in Cowes. So in 8 years, we've gone from the fastest, most celebrated yacht in the world to abandoned on a mudflat in Cowes. She's purchased by a shipwright as a turnaround project, a flip, we might say, in 2025. A shipwright fixes her up. She's still blazingly fast and puts her up for sale. What happens next veers into almost unbelievable. And if I hadn't done the research, it would boggle my mind. So less than 10 years after America wins that race, she is sold to a Confederate sympathizer who sails her back across the Atlantic to the southeastern United States and begins working for the Confederate States of America with America as a blockade runner. She's very well suited to be a blockade runner when you think about it. She's black, she's low to the water, she's still blazingly fast. There's no record of her in the United States because she hasn't been around in 10 years. Of course, everybody knew about the cup and they know about the win and it's celebrated, et cetera, but her as a vessel appears out of the blue and begins running the blockade at the mouth of the St. Johns River, just upstream from Jacksonville, into Fernandina Beach, into Charleston, back and forth from Nassau to that area over and over and over. And she begins to become something of a legend running the blockade. So this is the area where the Confederates ran America, specifically right down here. Port Royal is, for those of you who remember your Civil War history, a Union stronghold, right? That's where Hilton Head is today. But Savannah, America appears there. Jacksonville, America appears there. And Charleston, America appears there. Not great written records of this, lots of oral tradition. Some written records, though, positively identify her there. This was America's main operation area, northern Florida. And again, those of you who are familiar with this area know that the St. Johns River enters here at Mayport and twists and turns through the woods before getting to Jacksonville. So America was expert at running in and out of Mayport and up to Jacksonville. And again, for those of you that remember your Civil War history or that follow the Civil War, Jacksonville, despite its location in the Deep South, was one of those locations that went back and forth a lot in the Civil War. The locals just wanted the port to be open. They just wanted to be making money with ships coming and going. They didn't have a lot of it seems as though they did not have a lot of built-in loyalty to either side. So the flag over Jacksonville changed fairly regularly. America was at risk of either being trapped outside if the Union was running the show, or if she was up in Jacksonville and the Union come in, being trapped inside. And that is indeed what happened in March of 1862. The Union, the American Navy, takes the mouth of the river, moves up the river, takes Jacksonville without a shot being fired, and America is trapped inside. So what did the Confederates do with their valuable blockade runner? Jacksonville is in a bit of chaos. They hand the keys, not literally, they hand the helm to a teenager who's a local, who's proven, and they tell him, take America as far up the river as you can go and hide her because we can't have her fall into the Yankee hands. Logical. So he takes America about 30 miles up the St. Johns River near Palatka, if anybody has been in that area. It was a resort town. The river gets slow and muddy and shallow up here. And this young man named Charles Hemmings decides he's going to sink America. He's not going to sink her to make her disappear. He's going to sink her to hide her, and eventually they'll come back and raise her and re-enter the Confederate Navy, right? Ever hopeful. So he drills 5 holes in the bottom and to fill her with water, thinking we'll come back and plug those holes later. The problem was that it was very shallow water, and she did not sink completely out of sight. She was still very much in sight when she sank. So a few days later, the American Navy, hearing rumors that America is up there, send a couple steamers up the river, and at Palatka, they succeed in plugging the holes, raising America, bringing her back, and entering into service of the Union Navy. Now, at this point, 10-ish years after, 10, 11 years after her famous victory, America has been ridden hard and put away wet, as we would say, right? She has served in the Confederate Navy running blockades. She's been sunk. She's been abandoned, et cetera, et cetera. You would think that a vessel with this sort of pedigree is due for a spa day, but is also very much due, for some respect. You could send her north to the Naval Academy. You could send her north to stash her in Boston, for example, till the war's over, et cetera. She's too valuable. So Samuel DuPont, who's the admiral in charge of the blockade for the Union down in this area, mounts a gun on her bow, cleans her up, puts a new captain on her, and sends her out to enforce the blockade at Charleston. So America finds herself enforcing the blockade for nearly a year off Charleston, right there on the string of Union vessels stopping Confederate. She's involved in chases. She fires that gun at vessels. She's involved in some captures, et cetera. So, again, we have the most famous yacht ever built doing this very workmanlike duty. Finally, cooler heads prevail. DuPont has enough vessels to reinforce. America is sent north for purposes of Naval Academy. Now, the United States Naval Academy had been moved to Newport during the Civil War to get it away from the South. So America ends up in Newport and finishes the war in Newport. After the war, I'm sorry, on her way north, she stops in Massachusetts for a light refit. This is believed to be the first image of America. I could not find any images earlier than this. So this is America. You know, again, recognize those raked masts, recognize that long, low shape. One of her nicknames, the low black schooner. So here she is at the Charlestown Navy Yard. After the Civil War, the Naval Academy's fleet sails back to Annapolis, and America becomes a training vessel at Annapolis. A few years later, she's sold into private hands. General Benjamin Butler, the governor of Massachusetts, buys her. Now, General Butler is a controversial guy. Any Civil War fans or New Orleans people in here remember that phrase, the Beast Butler, who was the occupier of New Orleans to great drama down there. He's a controversial guy. He ran for president 3 times in 3 different parties and lost all 3 times. But he was a great yachtsman, and he had a lot of money, and he lavished a lot of care on America. He respected her. He refitted her. He sailed her hard. He entered her into races. He cruised her. She cruised to Bermuda. She cruised into the Caribbean. She cruised to Cuba. Here, near the turn of the century, she's sailing off Gardner's Bay, New York, painted white with a slightly different rig than she had. But General Butler is an excellent steward for the vessel. So finally, some respect for our girl here. Here she is again. Butler passes away. His heirs take over. Running a 110-foot boat, which is now 50 years old, is an expensive operation. And the heirs begin looking for people to buy and take care of America. Enter Sir Thomas Lipton of tea fame, another famous yachtsman from the UK. Thomas Lipton knows America is for sale and expresses interest. Sir Thomas Lipton cables regarding noted schooner yacht, 1917. Next, some history-minded yachtsmen get involved. Not unlike, and I wrote a book about Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse, not unlike the locals here that in the 1960s took the initiative to buy the Hooper Strait Lighthouse and have it moved from its site to this museum. You know, that's a great story of interested parties taking action to save something. Up in the Boston area, a syndicate of yachtsmen got together, bought America from the Butler heirs, and decided they were going to donate her back to the Naval Academy. You know, they were going to do this as again, similar to the Hooper Strait Lighthouse here. So America, bought by this syndicate, is de-rigged and towed by submarine chaser from Boston to Annapolis. I actually was in contact with the grandchildren of this photographer. This was a Boston Globe sports photographer who said, most of the time we get contacted by book authors and researchers. They want pictures of Ted Williams, and they want pictures of Fenway Park, and they want pictures like that. We don't get this one too often, but they were happy to allow me use of this image and this image. So America is towed from Boston to Annapolis, and when she gets to Annapolis, on the edge of the Severn River, the syndicate led by Charles Francis Adams collects $1 from the superintendent of the Naval Academy as a token, and America is now at the United States Naval Academy. 1921, 70 years after her famous victory. We think things are good now. Naval Academy, perfect. Well, this is an old wooden racing sailboat. This is not the kind of thing the Navy is especially interested in 1921, right? Between the wars, Navy, they didn't ask for this, right? They were given this. So what happens to America, the Naval Academy, is actually a little bit of an interesting twist and brings us to the Annapolis Yacht Yard a few years later. So this is modern day Annapolis, the city dock right here, out to the Chesapeake Bay in the lower right, Eastport here in the bottom. We're going to zoom in here on the Naval Academy. This is the modern day Naval Academy Santee Basin, where the Navy sailing program is run out of. And then in the lower right, Farragut Field, the fields along the Severn River. So America this is what the shoreline looked like in 1921 when she arrived. This is all landfill that came later. America was left in Dewey Basin, which is now where there's a lovely track. And she was put there in a permanent slip, literally bolted, her gangplank literally bolted to the pier and bolted to the deck. If you were to stand at this spot looking out towards America, this is what you would have seen 20 years at the Naval Academy. So again, we recognize those raked masts and that long, low form, that beautiful, graceful stern swept up there, right? Those are some of when you see an image, you can always tell it's America. That's what she looked like. And she didn't move for 20 years, up and down with the tide. That was it. Occasionally dressed with flags on some important day. Midshipmen would tumble aboard and take class pictures. I was fortunate enough to speak with a couple of gentlemen who grew up in Annapolis in this era, and they said they remember as boys freely walking in and out of the academy, and they would climb onto America and play pirate on her decks. They would climb up and down and pretend like they were taking the vessel, etc. So this is a very cool 1937 image of the Naval Academy in color. Those of you who remember, this is Thompson Stadium right here, which is where the Navy football team played back in the day. The chapel right here, downtown Annapolis on the left. If you look very closely, there's America in her slip in 1937. So our story now shifts. There's America across Spa Creek to the Eastport section of Annapolis. So finally, after 20 years rotting in her slip, with bare minimum attention paid to her as a photo backdrop, a very special sponsor gets involved in America's life. President Franklin Roosevelt was a yachtsman. He loved history. He loved the Navy. He heard that America was in Annapolis, and he decided that America needed a rehabilitation, and that America would be a lovely centerpiece for a Navy museum that he envisioned in Washington, D.C., with famous vessels. And if we could get America cleaned up and fixed up and moved to Washington, D.C., she'd be a lovely centerpiece there. So Roosevelt begins privately asking around. Remember, we're in the Depression here. So the idea of a president looking to restore a yacht with public funds is probably not going to go over very well. But privately begins asking around, who could do this work? How can we find out what we even have here with America? Well, just across the creek, where the Chart House restaurant is today, in the Eastport section of Annapolis, was a new yacht yard that had just been established. Coming out of the Depression, two entrepreneurs from New York came down, took possession of this property, and established what they grandly called the Annapolis Yacht Yard. They began doing repairs on wooden boats with goals of building a series of wooden powerboat production vessels. So an assembly line of powerboats coming off the dock there. This is what it looked like when they took possession in 1939, a very humble but effective yacht yard. There's not a lot of work. It's the Depression. So all of the great wooden boat talent in Anne Arundel County begins assembling at this place. Two entrepreneurial owners from New York, young guys still in their 30s with grand plans. And they've got some money, they've got some backing, and the yard begins to get a little bit of traction. And before you know it, it becomes the largest private employer in Annapolis. And they're having some success. This is a photo from 1939, the Annapolis Yacht Yard here in the foreground. This is Bat Creek in the background. For those of you that know Annapolis, these streets are still laid out this way. They begin taking out advertisements. This 1939 advertisement presents a couple of vessels that were built there. Their goal, again, was to build standard production boats. They didn't want to build one-off custom boats. They wanted to build, say, a 34-footer and build dozens of them off an assembly line. They were inspired by the Detroit assembly line process. So that was their goal. They maintained an office in New York City, up in a very well-to-do, nice, high-end address opposite Grand Central Station for yachtsmen from up there. But this was their goal. I've gotten to know the families of the descendants of the two gentlemen that did this. And I always love to point out their ambition. 1939, we're not out of the Depression yet. They're technically in Eastport, Maryland. It's not yet Annapolis, but they call themselves the Annapolis Yacht Yard. Okay, that's good. They pose their vessel in front of Bancroft Hall at the Naval Academy to get all of the halo goodness coming off of the Naval Academy at that point. So, you can trust us. We are Annapolis. There's the Naval Academy. They've got some cojones, we might say, in 2025. This is an example of a vessel that they built 67 feet in 1939. And this is probably the one they were most proud of, a 70-footer named From Now On, built in 1940. This was the last private vessel that they built before the war, because clearly the war is getting closer and closer to the United States. And their production line is not going to be building 34-foot cabin cruisers. It's going to be building vessels for the United States Navy and our allies. Enter the picture, Franklin Roosevelt's son, James Roosevelt, is a yachtsman. And this is the vessel that he sailed, Siwana. Cruised this. The president went on cruises on this, a lot up in Maine, but also down on the Chesapeake Bay. And in the summer of 1940, James Roosevelt was sailing on the Chesapeake Bay and needed some work done on his schooner. So where does he bring it? To the Annapolis Yacht Yard. They've got the talent, they've got the capabilities. He reports back to his father, guess what? There's a great wooden boat yacht yard less than a mile away from America, which I know you're interested in. Why don't we put those two things together? And that's indeed what happened, was America was brought to the Annapolis Yacht Yard for the beginnings of a survey and then a rehabilitation. So these buildings are no longer there. These railways are no longer there. This is the Chart House restaurant, for those of you familiar with Annapolis. America was hauled. America was hauled on a high tide, on a king tide, and blocked right there where I've drawn in that yellow rectangle. This is what America looks like hauled. For the last time she's hauled, I've got some oral histories of people that were on the scene that night and that next day. One thing that they all comment on was the smell. Wooden boat that's been in the water for a long time comes out, and there's a certain smell to it. We all can, I think, envision that smell being around boats. So America gets hauled. My friend Lawrence Harchie, who passed away a few years ago, as a teenager, visited and snapped this photo. And when he handed me the print of it, I said, Lawrence, this is remarkable. Look at what a photographer you are. You've lined up the Maryland State House in the lower left corner and the Naval Academy Chapel in the lower right corner, and you've captioned it, and this looks like it's high art here. This looks like something that should be hanging in a museum. And he goes, I was shooting with a Kodak Brownie, and I was 14 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. This is what I got. So I actually at one point wanted this to be the cover of the book. It does look like an art print, doesn't it? It's gorgeous. The Navy sends official photographers over to do some survey photos. So this is what we got. So here's America, the low black schooner in Eastport. The stern is still certainly very recognizable. I keep mentioning that. I'll come back to why at the end. And here she is. So out of the water for the first time in years, blocked up, getting surveyed. A much smaller Eagle on her. Austin is the hailing port, which is where the syndicate was from that rescued her. And she's out of the water in Annapolis. Those looking for photo references, which I always do, this is the Carroll House in St. Mary's Church there in, across the creek from Eastport in the background. So let me introduce the ship of Theseus paradox. Anybody remember this from philosophy class? The ancient Greeks had a hero named Theseus who operated in the Ionian Sea on a warship. And after his great victory, they brought his ship back to Athens, and they kept it there for hundreds of years. And every year they would take the ship of Theseus out to celebrate his great victory. And the philosophers began to scratch their beards and ask, well, it's a wooden boat, and we've replaced every part of it. Is it the same boat that Theseus sailed? Right? And it's that whole like renewal thing. What's the question of identity? If we've taken half the wood off of the ship of Theseus, is it still the ship of Theseus? What if we've taken all of the wood off of it and replaced it? Is it still the ship of Theseus? I'll give you a modern day example that happened right over here in the boat building shed at this maritime museum. I was speaking with a wooden boat builder over there, brought up the ship of Theseus idea in front of him, and he goes, "Oh, we got an Eastern Shore version of that. I have my grandfather's axe. The handle's been replaced 3 times and the head twice, but it's my grandfather's axe." That was the question with America. Was it still the same ship from 1851? So much wood had been replaced. Could you still call her America? What would it be if the modern wood was next to where the old wood was, if it's replaced exactly? There was some of this philosophy questions were happening. The problem for America is there's a war on, a big one. The way America first enters the war in this context is via the Lend-Lease program. The Annapolis Yacht Yard owners, as I mentioned, super entrepreneurial, went to England, talked to the Royal Navy, went to Washington, D.C., talked to the United States Navy, and began getting contracts to build warships for the Royal Navy. The first vessels that they built were subchasers, 110-footers. By February 1942, they're launching their first one into Annapolis Harbor. There's the State House right there. There's St. Anne's right there. Here's the crowd of proud people just a few weeks after Pearl Harbor. And right down the street from your house, your neighbors, your friends, your fathers are working to help win the war. This is exciting stuff. This is patriotic stuff. So the hundreds of people come out on this raw February day to watch the first vessel get launched into the Severn River. The Annapolis Yacht Yard is not in the cabin cruiser business. And at the moment, it's not in the America business. It's in the warship business. So being the history nerd that I am, I walked down to stand in this exact spot on the exact day of the calendar, on the exact time of day, to see what it looks like today. So that is what it looks like today on that spot. February. This is last February. So we'll do that one more time. So that's what it looks like today. It is a office complex with some maritime components to it there. The Annapolis Yacht Yard quickly becomes a trusted and important partner of the United States Navy for the Lend-Lease program. Their specialty are 70-foot wooden patrol torpedo boats, which the British call motor torpedo boats. We in the United States would call them PT boats, right? All of the PT boats built at Annapolis went to the British Navy, the Royal Navy, or to the Soviet Navy. Those were where they needed them the most. Lend-Lease set them off on that path. They ended up building over 120 of these boats. These were very fast to build. So you have double planked mahogany over oak frames, the flat sections up on deck, and here in the chart house, as they called this area, were built of marine plywood. Because of rationing and scarceness, and because the owners were so entrepreneurial, they began developing as much as they could in-house, to the point where they were even making their own plywood on site. They knew how to make marine plywood with glue and wood and a press. So they did as much as they could. They could build 6 patrol torpedo boats at once inside a specially built shed that still stands in Annapolis. And this is what they look like when they're launched. Naval Academy in the background again. No torpedo tubes on this yet, but this is the first patrol torpedo boat built in Annapolis, May of 1942. This happens very quickly. These PT boats are very sexy. They're very fast, as I mentioned, 45, 46, 47 knots. They're an independent command, so you don't have some admiral looking over your shoulders. They don't draw a lot of water. They can pack a punch with those torpedoes, with guns on the decks. They could cut off the Packards and had a little donkey engine, they called it, that ran fairly quietly so they could sneak up. They even had smoke pots on the stern that they could light off smoke pots and make a cloud of black smoke and attack out of that. So they captured the imagination of the American public. Admirals are cruising around on aircraft carriers, right? These are the young, daring officers, to the point where the son of the former ambassador to England volunteers for PT boat duty. Right? He wants to make a name for himself. That's John Kennedy, eventually president. Not an Annapolis-built boat, but the same idea. Again, these vessels capture the imagination of the American public. The idea that you could get in close to shore, pack a punch, and then get out of there was very sexy. And as you see, lots of advertising and very aggressive forms. I will point out, again, back to my boat aficionados in this room, and I assume almost all of you are, if not everyone. This is from now on, the last private vessel built before the war. This is an Annapolis-built motor torpedo boat to a Vosper design. Just a couple things I'll point out here. This notch here, about halfway down on the top side, you know, it was a Chris Nelson. That was the name of the naval architect at Annapolis. That was one of his signatures. You can see here, it's same in the torpedo boat, but it is used to help the torpedo clear the hull. You can see long flat runs aft, so she could get up, but she couldn't plane, but she could come close to it. You can see this clipper bow here, Okay, I'm starting to see it. This owner of From Now On was a wealthy guy out of the steel business. He had asked for a bandstand on top, an open air helm station. He wanted to feel the wind in his hair. I've spoken with his grandson, who's still with us. The owner wanted to feel the wind in his hair. He wanted to be able to see and feel the spray. These vessels also have a bandstand on top, except this bandstand had bulletproof sides on it. So in case they came under attack, they could duck down and hide from the bullets. This is what the Annapolis Yacht Yard letterhead looks like during World War II. They've got From Now On over there to remind you they're still yacht builders, but they've also got a Vosper, that's the name of the design, motor torpedo boat, running at speed in the Chesapeake Bay Morris Rosenfeld photo. Again, here's a motor torpedo boat running in the bay. They were so fast that and moving around on them at speed was so dangerous. They ended up having to put a lifeline across the stern here in case anybody fell or stumbled. They didn't want them falling off the back. They were so fast. 3 Packard gasoline engines. Annapolis Yacht Yard begins advertising their own vessels in the yachting magazines. So Black & Decker, Baltimore-based tool company, gets involved, wants to be part of the war effort, and electrifies the tools. So electric screw guns, electric riveters, electric hammers, etc. This allows vessels to be built much faster with electricity. It also allows some female wooden boat builders to come in. So there were some overnight shifts of females. They were running 3 shifts a day at the Annapolis Yacht Yard. So electric tools opens a lot of doors for them. Packard advertisement I just thought was great. The American monster with the flapping wings. Their deeds will live forever. One of the world's most deadly motor torpedo boats, Annapolis Yacht Yard. They were putting these ads in Yachting Magazine, in Rudder Magazine, in Motorboating Magazine, because they were always hedging that when the war ends, there's going to be a boom in yachting. So they were wanting to remind their next owners of what was coming. Again, another Annapolis Yacht Yard advertisement that begins blatantly mentioning your post-war boat. Right? So the war is going well, and we're now beginning to raise our heads out a little bit. The Axis is now feeling the death sting of Annapolis-built Vosper motor torpedo boats. I love it. America. It goes bad. March of 1942, there's a heavy snowstorm on Palm Sunday. You know, that heavy, wet snow we get sometimes in late winter when the conditions are right. The shed that had been built over America to protect her was built, and the wooden boat builders at the Annapolis Yacht Yard were very careful to point this out. It was built by the house carpenter. They couldn't spare the true wooden boat experts to build this shed. They were building motor torpedo boats. So a hastily, poorly built shed collapses on America in this snowstorm on Palm Sunday, 1942. This is what she looked like the next morning. A awful situation. Now, ship of thesis is not even the question. You know, is this at all rehabilitatable? And there's a war on. Look at the date, March of 1942, just a couple months after Pearl Harbor. So America is now out of, cannot be discussed any rehabilitation at this point. So our girl is in trouble. Here we are a couple months later, launching of a motor torpedo boat has just gone off this railroad. You've got Navy brass here, you've got Yacht Yard brass here, you've got Yacht Yard workers here, choker whites for the Navy on a nice spring day. The big shed in the background, which still stands, which had been built just a month or two earlier. There's America's Hulk in the background with one oak frame put in there, maybe to show a little progress. Embarrassing, right? Sad, embarrassing, but there's a war on. There's a world to save. Again, I went down, same day, same place, and took this picture last year. So there's the big shed now converted to offices. But one more time, I'm standing in the exact spot as a photographer. And here we are in modern day. So there's a war on. And Annapolis Yacht Yard, very important to the US Navy and our allies. This is in 1945. This is the Annapolis Yacht Yard at its best and highest. There are 10 motor torpedo boats visible in this photo. The big shed still stands. There were 6 under construction in the big shed. As soon as they could float, they came out this large opening and were put in the Spa Creek, pulled around into what is now the Chart House Restaurant, which was a boat shed at that point. And they could work and they could finish them in there. They could do the electronics in there. They could do the rigging in there. They could put the radar on in there, et cetera. So America is in this shed right in the center, this low shed. And for those on Zoom, it's in almost the exact center of the picture. I will point out that boat building sheds have large openings for vessels to come in and out of. They have lots of skylights and windows so the workers can do their work under natural light as much as possible. I will point out the America shed has neither of those. The America shed has one door, one tiny window. This was covering the ruins of America, and it was padlocked during the war, right in the center of their effort, as you can see. One more then and now. This is modern day. The big shed still standing. The office building still standing. The Chart House Restaurant is where the boat building shed was. So I'll do that one more time. You can go and have cocktails in the Chart House this evening, if you would like. Lovely fireplaces, etc. The war ends. Spoiler alert, the Allies win the war. The town went wild. The Annapolis Yacht Yard now has to convert itself to a yachting facility. And I'm watching the time here. I'm going to go about 5 more minutes, then we'll take some questions. They have an America problem, though. During the war, at the present time, the subject vessel is using space which could be made available for the building of 110-foot submarine chaser. That's a problem. A couple of days later, in view of the great national interest in the historic value of America, the Bureau does not consider this procedure available. So the Yacht Yard had asked to move America, and they were returned a couple days later with this. It was the fastest reply I ever got in the Navy, Dick Miller told me, who wrote that original memo. Loring Swayze, a captain in DC and a friend of Roosevelt, called after he issued this memo and got 24-year-old Dick Miller on the phone and said, not only no, but hell no. And Miller said, sir, why? We're trying to build subchasers. We're trying to build PT boats here. And he said, Franklin wishes it so. So America had a stay of execution. After that snowstorm and that collapse, we don't know if Roosevelt was ever told about that. I suspect he was not. You know, he's winning the war, right? America is probably not high on his mind. And the fact that America had been smashed in a snowstorm, he was probably never told about that. He likely died believing America was still going to be restored. So what happens by 1945? The war is over. Roosevelt's dead. Annapolis Yacht Yard's eager to move on. America is in very tough shape. And the Navy decides to scrap her. The Navy decides that the best thing to do is to just get rid of it. So they contract with the Annapolis Yacht Yard to scrap her, cut up and salvage the scrap. This is a heartbreaker to me. They get $200 credit for scrap lumber and $300 credit for pig iron. So the entire hulk is worth $500 at that point. So a clamshell crane is moved in and crunch load by load into the back of a dump truck, which takes the ruins of America to the Annapolis City dump and dumps her. No ceremonies, not much else. We'll go to that in a moment. Annapolis Yacht Yard begins trying hard to reemerge. Which do you prefer for spring delivery? And again, they now have this incredibly talented core of workers. They've got state-of-the-art tools. They know how to do mass production of vessels. They're very keen to do it. This Buck Rogers looking boat from early 1946 was never built. I kind of wish it was, and it does look like one of the modern, picnic boat type things we see coming out these days. The Annapolis Yacht Yard ends up breaking up, and they sell the property to the Trumpy family in 1947, who ran it into the 1970s. So Trumpy arrives 1947, and they run it till 1974. And at that point, fiberglass was taking over. They had some labor issues. There had been a fire. So Trumpy gets out of the wooden boat building business. Where did the PT boats end up? Where did they end up? This one ended up in Ocean City, New Jersey, called the Flying Saucer. And almost every time I talk, somebody raises their hand and say, "I went on that." There we go. It was a tourist attraction that when you went for your summer trip to the shore, you would go and get on this thing, and you would pay, and they would take you out and rip you around and do sharp turns and go fast and go over waves, et cetera. So this was an Annapolis-built PT boat, the Flying Saucer. There's one still with us, 728, one of the last ones built. A World War II museum in the Midwest owns her. They're in the process of converting her and rehabilitating her, but they're going to redo her as an Elco, which bugs me, but PT-109 was an Elco, and it's a much more recognizable vessel. The boat in the opening scenes of McHale's Navy, the opening credits, that is an Annapolis-built vessel. The Howard Hughes bought one of the Annapolis-built PT boats to use as a chase boat when he was doing the Spruce Goose. You remember the large plane? The only vessel that could keep up with it was an Annapolis-built PT boat, etc. Two reproductions have been built of the Schooner America that I talk about in this. 1967, the Schaefer Brewing Company built a reproduction of America in Maine, was launched, spent a lot of time on the Chesapeake Bay. Some of you may remember this vessel. It was based in Annapolis for a long time. I know it had been to St. Michael's a few times. It's in Italy being restored right now. The owners have reached out to me and have a copy of the book on board, which is kind of cool. 1975, this America is launched in upstate New York. And this America has also spent a lot of time on the bay. It was in Key West for a long time. It's in San Diego right now. I'll point out, I've mentioned that stern a few times and told you I'd get back to it. This much heavier, right? This boat has a John Deere engine in it. This boat has an owner's stateroom in it. This boat also is a modern day Coast Guard certified to carry passengers. So a lot of rules and regulations surrounding her that were not surrounding the 1851 vessel. But this is being run in San Diego. Also carries a copy of the book aboard, I'm proud to say. And this is a cool boat if you ever get a chance to go on that. So what happened to that America wood in Annapolis, and how did all those little bits get out into the world? And I'll wrap this up. What was most remarkable about the story was the Navy did that scrapping very quickly and very quietly. And once yachtsmen found out about it, they were pretty upset. We could have salvaged it. Mystic Seaport had just been founded, and the founder of Mystic Seaport wrote a couple harsh letters saying, like, we would have stepped in and taken all of it. And maybe not floated again, but we could have preserved it. And but that culture of saving things wasn't quite as prevalent. Again, we're right after the war. Well, Marshall Duer, D-U-E-R, some of you may know that name. He was a founder of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. He was a founder of the Chesapeake Bay Yacht Racing Association. He was a very active guy. He and a couple friends found out about this hauling away to the dump thing. And they literally went to the Annapolis City dump and found out where they had been dumped, and were pulled out planks and pulled out hunks of wood and pulled bits out. So in Annapolis and everywhere on the bay, if somebody holds up a little piece of wood and says, this is from the Schooner Yacht America, chances are good that it really was. And chances are good that it came either from Marshall Duer pulling it out of the dump, or there were souvenir raiders after the war ended who went into the Annapolis Yacht Yard and pulled bits and pieces off. Anybody in this room have a piece of the Schooner America? A couple, yep. There's always a couple. Thank you. And you'll find yacht racing trophies made out of America wood. There's a bit of it here at the museum, I understand. Little half hulls built all over the place. A dear friend of mine named Fred Hecklinger, who passed away a couple years ago. Anybody know Fred? Yeah, Fred was a yacht captain and just a historian and a gentleman who was a big help with this book. Fred had a lot of that original America material, and Fred, being a yachting guy and very handy, could carve a half hull of America pretty quickly. And the story goes, he would keep a few of these half hulls of America, just little ones, in the trunk of his car. And when he would be at Marmaduke's sailing bar in Annapolis, and they would come around and say, Fred, it's time to pay your tab. You've been running it up for a few weeks. It's time to pay your tab. He would go out to his car and grab a couple half hulls and sell them to the guys at the bar for his cash to pay his tab. One of those half hulls hangs at the Boatyard Bar and Grill now in Annapolis. So that's the story of how wooden PT boats and the most famous yacht ever built came to the Chesapeake Bay and merged together. I've got it captured here in this book called The Last Days of the Schooner America. I'll have it for sale afterwards. I'm happy to sign it. I've got some copies here. It came out this past summer. It's also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere you buy books. It's a hardcover. It's got about 80 pictures in it and nonfiction. So happy to take any questions and anything. Yes, sir.
The main best of Yacht America was at Arnie Gay's Yacht Yard. And you came down the hill and you took a left and it looked like a telephone pole, but it wasn't. And Arnie would tell me I could go in there with a chainsaw and lop off stuff. And I used to make a whole bunch of lamp bases out of that.
There we go.
But do you remember?
I know exactly what you're talking about because Fred
wasn't-
told me that.
It wasn't a telephone pole.
Yeah, so Fred told me that. So Arnie Gay, Annapolis Yachtsman, had a spar from America that Fred's description was, Arnie used it so people wouldn't drive on the grass. He would block it when he was trying to grow grass. He would block it off. And he said termites eventually got to that one. And another good Annapolis Yacht Yard or Annapolis Boatyard story down the road was Johnny Quass on the end of 6th Street on Back Creek. And Quass had some planks from America that he used as scaffolding when he was working on the side of a boat. And Fred and a couple other history-minded folks went down there and said, Johnny, planks, we're happy to give you new ones. Like we'll replace them in kind. And he goes, these are nice and stiff. I'm good. I like these. So
I do have folks who are online. So if you have questions and you're in the room, I'll come to you with the microphone. And if you're online and you have questions, you can type them in the chat and our moderator will represent your question here.
So you with the lamps is I love that. And so you have some authentic American. Do you know where are those lamps now, or how many of them are there?
The other guy that had a lot of material was Sam Foster.
Mm-hmm.
And he did a whole room in his house.
Of America material.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Got some of that too somewhere.
So Lawrence Harchie told me at one point, if you took all the purported wood of America and put it together, you could build a fleet of them. But then he followed that up with, however, if anybody holds a piece up and says this is a piece of the true cross, that was his phrase, believe them. It's not your job to tell them it's not. And I said, I'm in. So all of it's real as far as I'm concerned. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
The thing that's really interesting about that wood is how tight the grain is.
Yes.
It's fir and it's really tight.
And I've got a piece of teak that Fred gave me that's rock hard and black. Other questions in the room? About America, about screw pile lighthouses, about Army Navy football?
Wait a minute. Thomas Point Light, I don't know if you were familiar with it, but did have termites.
Yeah, Thomas Point.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yes.
I'm the guy that had to get it exterminated.
All right, somebody should write a book about you.
And in order to get something like that through the government, you have to get 3 bids. Now go out and get 3 exterminators to go out to Thomas Point and give you a bid.
A mile and a half offshore. Yeah.
I could only get 2 to even go out there. And
Yeah.
out
What year
there,
was that?
72, 73,
Yeah.
no, 71, let's say. I was stationed at Curtis Bay at
Yeah.
that
All
point.
right. Awesome. Any other questions? So the 2 lessons I learned doing this research and writing this book are this. First of all, I think a lot of the maritime industry in the middle part of the Chesapeake Bay, so I'll say Annapolis, Kent Island, southern Anne Arundel County, over here, even in Talbot County, a lot of the modern marine industry, I believe, descends from the Annapolis Yacht Yard's work. They employed over 400 people there during World War II. They built over 100 vessels there in just 4 years, and every single aspect of it was represented. Not just the wooden boat building, the people with chisels and hammers in their hands, but the electrical, the plumbing, the painting, the rigging, the marketing, the back office stuff, the accounting stuff, et cetera. And when the war ended, those people went out into the world and started hung their own shingles out, and trained today's workers. There's a very famous yacht carpenter in Annapolis who was trained by an Annapolis Yacht Yard Finnish carpenter, right? And I believe that was a major thing. And the second lesson that I learned from writing this book is, we do now have this culture of saving things, which all of us who are fans of museums, love this culture. You've got a lighthouse right here. You've got a shed full of vessels here. Just around us is this. That culture hasn't always been around. I'm very thankful for that. Archives and collections, incredibly important. I actually did some research for this book at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum's archives. Dick Miller has a file here at these archives, and I visited here. Oral histories were incredibly important. So in the 90s, people had the foresight to sit down and press record on a tape recorder and begin asking questions about this. Those are now transcribed and available to the public. So, anything we can do to support that enables these stories to come to life. And that really came real for me. The descendants of the principals of the Annapolis Yacht Yard and the people that work there were so thankful for this book. They didn't love the fact that America is the star and that she was crushed in a snowstorm on their watch. But the patriotic entrepreneurial spirit that their forebears had is now captured and recorded. And I just think that the ability to have those sort of collections, not just physical things, but also oral histories and written histories and that sort of thing, is so incredibly valuable. And here we are 80 years later, telling the story of these remarkable people. So thank you for the opportunity. And I think that's it. No other questions.
A huge thank you to David. I have 2 concluding thoughts. One, David has books if you'd like to purchase. They make fabulous gifts and also a great thing to do on a winter day. But secondly is you may or may not know, but I'm going to take the plug for oral histories and for documentation. Oral histories make up a really important part of our collections and our documentation here at CBMM. And there are ways that you can get involved with supporting those oral histories. So just looking around the community and thinking about stories that we need to save, that are important to save. This is a place to preserve those. And when there are oral histories in other collections at other museums, we're also happy to be a cross repository. So to cross list and make those resources accessible to researchers like David. So if that is something that got you thinking, then please come talk to me, and I'm happy to get you involved in oral histories and the saving of the culture. Have a fabulous day, and please stay warm.